Good morning, y'all. Welcome back. It's going to be a beautiful day today. It's supposed to not be nearly as hot as it has been. That'll be nice for a change. Today we're going to talk about control arm ends. If you put a suspension, well, even from the factory, you've got control arms. If you put a suspension kit on, you might have the short arms, which are like the factory arms, or a long arm kit, which is what I've got. And then with long arm kits, you can have a true 4-link, a 3-link, or you can have a radius arm, which is basically the factory setup except longer. That's what I have. That's what I would like to get. Eventually get a true 4-link, but one step at a time. So we're going to talk about these today because I've got to replace an end, a bushing, and so I figured it'd be a good time to talk about the different kinds of ends that come on the suspension kits, and also you can replace yourself. So you basically have 3 different kinds of ends for your control arms. You can either have the Heim or a Johnny joint type end, which is this is one of my spare Johnny joints. Looks like this, screws in. The Johnny joints are just built more specifically for off-roading than the Heim joints. They'll last a little longer. And if you've got threaded ends on your rods, that's basically what you got is a joint, a Heim joint or a Johnny joint. And then you've got the factory rubber type bushings. This is an example of one. This is a factory lower bushing that will go in the lower control arm. And if you've got rough country long arms, this also fits in the front end of the long arm on the bottom. And then there's urethane, which this is a urethane bottom one. Now what you would do if you run urethane, you leave, so if you're replacing one of these rubber, you press out the whole thing, the metal and everything. It's pressed into its hole, and you got to usually you just kind of hammer down the end so that your whatever you're pressing it out with can push it against it, and you push out that whole thing. Now if you're going to use a urethane, you leave the metal sleeve in there, and you basically just got to remove the rubber. And it's a process. You got to go in there with a wire brush and scrapers and everything, get all the old rubber out so that you're just left with the metal sleeve in there before you go put this. Will slide in there, press in there. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So advantages and disadvantages. So the best thing is the Heims or the Johnny joints. They're way better at articulation. They're way better off-road. The only downside to them is you might not have as good ride quality on the road, which if it's an off-road buggy, it wouldn't matter. But if it's your daily driver, it might be a consideration. Also, you know, if you buy a suspension kit and it's got bushings at one end and a Heim joint at the other, or bushings at both ends, that's pretty much what you got, unless you're going to cut the end off and weld in a threaded bung so you can run a Heim joint. So the factory rubber are the best ride quality, which is one of the reasons that the factory uses them, and they can articulate to a point, and they bounce back easier. So if you are articulating and your control arm is going to be, it'll look, so you'll have your bushing here, and the end of your control arm is basically a U with a bolt through it. So that bolt rides in this hole, and that rubber provides some movement. So when you're articulating, it can move and bounce back and not necessarily tear it up. Now there is a limit to everything, but it does provide some movement. And of course, the more you do that, then the faster you'll wear it out. So then you have urethane. So urethane is a lot stiffer than rubber, and urethane provides a good ride on the highway. The problem with urethane is if you use them in an off-road vehicle on a control arm end and you're articulating, when this bolt is moving, it's crushing this, and it will eventually just tear this thing to pieces. It does not have the bounce back that rubber does. Really good on-road, not the best idea off-road. But there is one advantage, which is once you've put them on and you've cleaned out these metal sleeves so that you can slide your urethane bushing in there, they're really easy to swap. It's a piece of cake to change one out. So that's really the only advantage. And like I said, they are good on road. And so basically what I've been having is when I first got my Cherokee, it's got a rough country long arm, radius arm suspension on it. Came with it when I bought it. I replaced all of the Heim joint ends with the Johnny joints, and I replaced the factory, the rubber bushings, all with urethane. So now I have a good ride on the road, but just about every other time I go off-road, I end up having to swap out one of the bushings. Now, the good thing is they're easy to swap out, and if you buy the kit for the Cherokee, you get enough bushings because you have Heim joints at one end of the rod. You get enough bushings to swap them out several times. So there's that. So yeah, there's advantages and disadvantages to everything. Best off-road is all Heims or Johnny joints, and that's fine on road too, but you're gonna have a little rougher ride. If it's your daily driver, depending on if you're young and if you're older like me, you don't necessarily want you want a little bit better ride. I mean, granted, it's a four-wheel drive that's jacked up. It's not going to have that great a ride anyways. But then you're kind of stuck with what you have. So that's something to keep in mind if you're shopping for a suspension, is what kind of ends they have, so you know where you're going to end up. Now, I will tell you, on the rough country arms that are on my truck, which it's a long arm system, they used the factory rubber ends on the arms. So if you have one that goes bad and you need to replace it, it's the factory rubber end. It'll go right in there. So now let me show you what the reason we are talking about all these joints is. We come out and grab the flashlight. So last weekend we went down to Gulches and I took off my sway bar disconnect so I could get a good articulation. And what happened is, hopefully you can see that right there. Get the camera up in here. Let me get this. There we go. Alright, see right there, you see all that urethane hanging out down there? That bushing is toast. So, but it's no problem, because all we got to do is take that bolt out and lift that radius arm up, slide with a hammer, of course, that old bushing out and put the new one in, and that'll take care of it. I can always tell when one's gone bad because I start getting a clicking, clunking in the front suspension when I go around a corner. So that's it. Now, I've had pretty good luck with the bottom joints as far as the urethane joints go. It always seems to be that driver's side upper that goes. Like I said, it's pretty easy to replace, so no biggie there. And if you get the kit for the Cherokee, it comes with, there's the number right there. Now it comes with 4 of the small bushings that go on the top control arms and 4 of the large bushings that go on the bottom control arms. So if you got a suspension that has heims at one end and the bushings at the other, you get enough bushings to change these out, you know, as they go bad, a couple of times. And the kit's not that expensive. I don't remember exactly how much it was, but it wasn't that expensive. But let me, I'm gonna get the Cherokee pulled in here and get the tools out and everything, and we'll swap this urethane bushing out, and I'll show you what I'm talking about with ease of swapping it out. So I'll be right back. Okay, I apologize for having not filmed it, but I've got the bushing out. So depending on what size bolt you have through there, if it's factory or not, mine is a 7/16 bolt, so it takes a 5/8 on one end and 11/16 on the other. But you basically got to pull that bolt out of here, and then this arm you can lift it off of there and lay it off to the side, and then your bushing goes in here. Now this part is the sleeve from the original factory rubber bushing. So when I replaced the bushings with urethane, I just left that sleeve in there and cleaned all the rubber out of it, because the urethane bushing slides into that sleeve. You reuse it. If you were putting a rubber bushing in here, you would knock that sleeve out and press the whole rubber and metal assembly back in there. So when you take these out, you can knock this part out first, and that'll give you a little bit easier time knocking the urethane part out. So the damage, let me get up to the table here. So this is the bushing I just pulled out of there, and you can see it's rather extensively damaged, and it's cracked all the way through right there. So that's what happens with too much articulation on these urethane bushings, which is why the rubber ones would probably be better. And in hindsight, I probably would have put the rubber ones back in there. But since I have these urethane ones, a whole box of them, I'm just going to keep replacing them until I run out of them, and then I'll put the factory rubber bushings in there. But so here's the new one, and then that ring right there on the ground, that red ring, goes on the end of this once it's in there, on the opposite side of this flange. The flange on the bushing goes on the same side as the flange on the metal piece from the old bushing. So when you go to put these back in there, you got to put some grease on them, and you put the red part in, then you put some grease on that metal sleeve and tap it in, and then you get your bolt back in there. And putting the bolt back in is where you have to wrestle with it, because very rarely does it just slide in and bolt up. You got to move things around, push, pull, prod, pry to get that bolt back in there. And you put the bolt back in, tighten it up. So let me get on to that, and then I'll come back and show you the finished product. I turned the camera off to change the battery, and then took a break, and then forgot to turn the camera back on. So after all that wrestling, I figured out, I remembered I had to pick up on the body, not the axle, to get the bolt back in. It's kind of a pain in the ass because everything's got to line up just right. So I got the bolt in there now. We'll tighten it down real quick. And there we go. That is it. So, let me get this light here. And now we have an installed bushing ready for another few weeks of driving back and forth to work before we take this four-wheeling and break the bushing again. Now, hopefully all this information has helped somebody. Maybe if you're trying to figure out what kind of suspension system you want to buy or what have you, this information will be valuable to you. Just know pretty much anything you do, you're going to end up having to modify and fix up, because it seems like almost nothing is perfect straight from the manufacturer, parts or aftermarket. So every once in a while something's awesome, but right now not so much. But we're good to go. We got our bushing back in. We can let this thing off of the jack stand, off of the jack, put all my tools away, and move on to the next project. So appreciate y'all watching. Y'all have a good one.